Now, the South African government is monitoring a mystery respiratory virus outbreak in China. Some of the symptoms of the virus that's causing widespread concern resemble those of COVID-19. They include coughing, the shortness of breath, congestion, and even fever. For more on this, I am joined by Professor Cheryl Cohen, who is the head of the Center for Respiratory Diseases and Meningitis at the National Institute for Communicable Diseases. Professor, thank you so much for the time. HMPV is the name then. Human Metapneumovirus is what we're looking out for here. How did this start, if you may allow us to get we just don't want to have, of course, the misinformation we had in the past year. Let's talk about its history and what exactly it entails and the symptoms.
Firstly, I think everyone's reporting this as a mystery respiratory virus, but it's not really a mystery respiratory virus. And you mentioned the virus that people are talking about is called HMPV, which stands for Human Metapneumovirus. And this isn't a mystery virus. This is a virus that we know about and have known about for many years. And in fact, it causes a respiratory illness in South Africa and all over the world every year. And so I think, I think in a way people have put different things together. In fact, this time of year is the winter in the Northern Hemisphere. So China falls in the Northern Hemisphere, similar to the United States and Europe and a number of other countries. And so now is their winter season. And not surprisingly, in their winter season, they're seeing an increase in respiratory illness, as we do in South Africa in our winter season, which falls around June and July. And so there is this increase in respiratory illness. And one of the viruses, it's not the only virus that they've picked up, is this human metapneumovirus. So a lot of the media, have picked up on this. But in fact, this is not an unexpected event, and it's not a mystery virus. It's one of the normal respiratory viruses that we see.
Yeah, I mean, just doing a quick search on this as well. Then it was first isolated in 2001, actually back in the Netherlands. Then let's talk about any concerns we should perhaps be having, not just in South Africa, but globally as well, and the spread that this could actually incur. Could it spread as vastly, as quickly, as dangerously as COVID-19?
So I'll talk about the two parts. The first isolated in 2001 in the Netherlands. I mean, the interesting thing about that is this virus, human metapneumovirus, is not like COVID in that in 2001 it was the first time it was identified, but it didn't emerge in 2001. In other words, when we look back at samples from before 2001, we see that the virus has been around for a long, long time. It was just that nobody had discovered it, and probably there's other, many people who present with respiratory illness. There's lots of different viruses that cause colds and flu, probably still some that we don't know about. So this virus was discovered in the Netherlands in the 2000s, but actually it had been around for a long time. So it's very different from COVID or some kind of new virus that emerges. It's actually a virus that's been around forever. In terms of the risks to us, I really don't think at this stage it represents a risk to South Africa. The World Health Organization has assessed the level of respiratory illness in China to actually be within normal range. In other words, it's not actually more than what they would see in a typical winter season. And this virus is not unexpected to occur amongst other viruses in their winter season. We have it in South Africa, and it circulates in South Africa throughout the year, occasionally increasing and decreasing. And so we don't really need to worry about importation of this virus because, in fact, it's already around. But now is our summer. And so summer isn't really our respiratory season. And so typically, we wouldn't expect any kind of large respiratory outbreak at this time of the year.
If it circulates the same way, has it ever been deadly?
So similar to many other respiratory viruses, these viruses in most people will cause mild disease, so cold and flu. And that's the same for other viruses, influenza, respiratory syncytial, even COVID. Typically, when you get it, you have a cold or a flu and it passes, right? But in vulnerable people, for this virus, it's particularly very young children under the age of 6 months, premature babies, but also the elderly who's immune, or people with underlying disease like heart disease or lung disease, then it can cause very severe disease and can be deadly and cause what we call a pneumonia or infection of the lungs, which can result in being admitted to hospital. So all of these viruses, and this one included, can cause severe disease, but not usually in healthy people, although even in healthy people, sometimes, for reasons we don't fully understand, all of these viruses can go on to cause pneumonia.
Help me understand, does HMPV then spread in the same way? And I know I keep referring to COVID-19, it's just an easier way for people to perhaps understand then. In terms of the spread between persons, can it spread the same way, whether it be through orally, whether it be through hands, for example, as well? Are those still the concerns that we would have with HMPV?
Yeah, absolutely. So this virus, like most respiratory viruses, COVID is a good example because people know about it. Flu is another good example. It spreads mostly through respiratory droplets. And then, of course, these droplets can get on your hands and they can get onto surfaces. And so the way to protect yourself against this virus is to wash your hands regularly. If you are sick, cover your nose and mouth, wear a mask, don't go to work. And then better ventilation to increase the airflow. So all of the things we know about COVID. And I think this is why it's important for us to practice these measures all the time, to practice basic hygiene, to make sure places are well ventilated, to practice cough hygiene in particular, because a multitude of respiratory viruses can be spread in the same way. And it is always a concern.
Let's talk about cures and vaccines, because that will always be a hot topic on this as well. Are there any cures? Are there any vaccines? And if you do have HMPV, how long are you anticipating to remain sick, needing to isolate for, etc.?
So this is a virus. So for most viral respiratory infections, in fact, we don't have specific treatments. In other words, it's not like a bacteria where you can have an antibiotic. For many viruses, and this one included, we don't have a specific drug that targets the virus. So if people get sick with it, it would be more supportive treatment, which is bed rest, taking something for fever, something for pain. If you're very sick and you need to be admitted to hospital, we might give you oxygen to support your breathing. But there's no specific drug to target the virus. In terms of vaccines, there's actually a lot of interest in developing new vaccines for this virus. It's closely related to another virus, which is called RSV, the respiratory syncytial virus, which is a very important cause of pneumonia in young children in South Africa and globally. And that virus has very recently had a new vaccine, which is very exciting. And because they're closely related, quite a few people are also trying to develop vaccines for this virus, which causes a lot of colds and flu and can cause pneumonia as well. But they're not available yet. Those should come in the next few years.
Is it not of concern, though, Prof, that we're still talking about needing to wash hands, that perhaps we've reverted back to old ways? Is that a fear?
Well, I think, respiratory disease is notoriously difficult to control because it travels through the air. And so I think it's important to keep on reinforcing the messages about washing hands and about cough hygiene, etc. But I don't think, I think we know that very strong measures like lockdowns and wearing masks will control respiratory viruses, but probably the cost is not worth it for the benefit. So I think we need to probably resign ourselves to living in a world where we do get respiratory illness, but absolutely it is always important to reinforce those messages. And an important one is also to stay home if you're sick. And another really important one is to get your vaccine. There's no vaccine for this virus, but there are in the routine childhood immunizations, and that's the vaccines given before 2 years, and also importantly, the boosters at 6 years and 12 years of age, which parents often forget. There are a number of vaccines against respiratory illness, and those vaccines are obviously much better protection than these other measures of non-pharmaceutical intervention. So there is something we can do, to try, especially in our kids, reduce their risk of getting these diseases.
Yeah, very interesting. Just very finally then, Doc, as well, then, we seem to be in a world where we're going to have to look out for a lot of these viruses, and of course, fear-mongering and all of the like will certainly persist in that way and in that sense as well. Are we sitting with a time where we're just going to have to keep on the lookout and keep worrying about these viruses on an almost monthly basis? Because it feels like that is the case.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. And one of the important things we do at the National Institute for Communicable Diseases is we monitor, globally for any potential risky events. We know that SARS-CoV-2 emerged from a virus that was in animals and crossed the species barrier into humans. We know that another important virus, influenza, has been described in the past to cross over from animals into humans, and we know that this could happen again. And so there's a global effort to monitor these viruses and detect any cases of crossing the species barrier into humans, and be prepared, develop new vaccines, and also more broad pandemic preparedness activities. And so absolutely, I think even before SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, people within the respiratory virus community knew that it was, in a sense, inevitable that such an event would happen. I think what's difficult is to make the case to invest in preparedness in so-called peacetime. But I think the world has learned something from the pandemic, and absolutely we need to keep on being prepared and monitoring, because we know that these events will happen again. History tells us that, you can't tell when. It might be 1 year, it might be 10, 20 years until the next a new respiratory virus, but it will happen at some point, and we need to.
I know I said final question, but you just piqued my interest there. Does that mean that we are at least increasing research, monetary funding, increasing vaccination drives as well in the, let's call it peacetime, as you made note of, which is a time in which we don't actually have these viruses thriving as much?
So absolutely. I think globally and also in South Africa, there's been a lot of a look back at how did we respond to the pandemic, and what can we do to be better prepared going forward. And yes, I think throughout the world, we need to learn from what has happened and develop new best practice and invest in this. And that process is happening absolutely all the time.
Professor, appreciate the time. Thank you so much for clearing out quite a few things as well with regards to that. And hopefully we can have this conversation again if needed to clear up any more issues as well. Professor Cheryl Cohen there is the head of the Center for Respiratory Diseases and Meningitis at the National Institute of Communicable Diseases.